Trauma Therapist Podcast 384. Welcome to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy Macpherson. My mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to help support and inspire new trauma workers through this podcast and my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0. Thanks so much for joining me today, and here we go. Hey folks, Guy here. Quickly before we get started, after having done over 380 interviews with the amazing guests that I am fortunate to bring on this podcast, one of the themes that continually comes up again and again and again is the importance of self-awareness, of authenticity, of presence and vulnerability, and how to cultivate that. This topic is my passion. It inspires me. Why? Because it's something that I've been on a journey to do, and all within the context of working with people who've been impacted by trauma. I want to invite you to join me for a live workshop September 20th through 22nd at the Incredible Art of Living Retreat Center in Boone, North Carolina. Once again, that's September 20th through 22nd. You can get all the information by going to theheartcenteredworkshop.com. That's theheartcenteredworkshop.com. I will see you there. What's the point of having a beautiful website if it doesn't attract the clients you want to see? As the worldwide leaders of website design for therapists, Brighter Vision sees this issue happening way too often. A nice looking website doesn't equate to a successful website. The truth is, your current website might even be turning off potential clients. That's where Brighter Vision comes in. Brighter Vision's team of website designers will create you a website that is centered around attracting and retaining your ideal client so that you can have a nice looking website as well as a successful one. Better yet, Brighter Vision is offering $100 off a new website as part of their 4th of July sale. To take advantage of this offer, simply go to brightervision.com/guy. Again, that's brightervision.com/guy. This episode is sponsored by Trauma Therapist 2.0, community to educate, support, to inspire new trauma healers. If you're a new trauma worker, new trauma provider and healer, you're starting out on this trauma-informed journey and you're tired of doing this alone and looking for support, looking to be around a community of other passionate trauma clinicians, I invite you to check out Trauma Therapist 2.0 at traumatherapist2.com. That's traumatherapist2.com. All right, guys, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. As the episode number continues to increase here, I think now I'm up to 380 episodes and interviewed, 380 individuals. Granted, there have been repeats on that, but it's been making me think more and more about, what I'm doing. I mean, now that I'm doing this full time and what the hell am I doing with this work, with the podcast, with the courses I'm putting together in my life. Really, it's a whole wave of thoughts about purpose and direction. And now that I'm in the throes of putting together and refining this workshop I'm doing in September up at the Art of Living Retreat Center in Boone, North Carolina, September 20th through 22nd, I wanted to take the time to, number one, invite you out there to join me, because we're going to be really talking about cultivating authenticity and presence and vulnerability and compassion within the context of working with people who've been impacted by trauma. So this is really specifically geared towards newer trauma therapists. But as I've been, again, refining this workshop, it's been making me think more and more about, like I said, what I'm doing, and what I consider to be my strengths and proclivities and leanings and influences and so forth. And as I was getting ready for this podcast this morning, I was thinking about really back several years ago when I was in Los Angeles. I was living with my sister at the time, and I was writing fiction at the time. I was done for the day. This was way before I was in graduate school. But I remember finishing up my writing for the day and sitting there in the living room. It was a hot day, and I was just like, ugh, done. And I got this phone call, and it kind of was one of those out of the blue phone calls, and it was a friend of mine that I used to work with in a restaurant in San Francisco. And we had kind of lost touch for a few years, but it turned out that she was calling people to let them know that she had AIDS, and she had been living with AIDS for several years at that point. And basically she was calling people to say goodbye. And I remember being on that phone call and not knowing what to say, fumbling around, and we hung up. And it was, and I've talked about this before, it was as if just a fiery, javelin struck through my core, struck through my chest. And there was, I just was so sad. I didn't know what to do. It really made me reflect on my own life and my own purpose. Because I had been writing, interestingly enough, about people kind of moving towards their heart, their soul, their truth. And I thought for a moment that really I wasn't doing that. I mean, I was writing about that, and I loved writing, but there was something else there. And that was the starting point really for me to really needing to figure out the direction that I needed to go. And so I started taking these trips. I started taking these kind of adventure vacations, in a sense, really to test myself, to find my fears, to test my fears and challenge myself. And on one of these trips I took, it was a survival course. And I remember being on this course out in the middle of nowhere in the Utah desert in the summer. It was just ridiculously hot. And excuse me, I found myself with about 15 other people, strangers, and three guides who were just amazing. I mean, they were like mountain goats, these people, and it was so inspiring to watch them. But on the second or third day, we had been out. We were started without food for the first 4 days. So I think maybe it was the second day, and we were doing a lot of strenuous hiking. One of the members got really sick, this guy, and he just became dehydrated, and he was sick, and myself and this other woman stepped up and encouraged him, and we carried him because the guides they were waiting back, right? They were waiting back. We didn't know this till later, but they were waiting back to see, well, all right, who's going to help this guy? Who's going to help your teammate, essentially? So myself and this other girl, we carried this guy, and we talked to him, we encouraged him, and we kept him in the shade when there was shade. And that moment, that experience was one of the experiences that really inspired me to get into this field, because I left there that trip and I was like, I'm going to go back to school, because I had gone to high school, and I had gone to art school for a year and then dropped out. But after that trip, I said, I'm going to be a physician. I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to go to medical school. And kind of a crazy idea, but after that trip, I went back. I had to go back and get my bachelor's degree. I had to do pre-med stuff, and I really, really struggled with the sciences, and it just was not happening for me. But still, I had this burning desire to help people in dire situations, really people who have been traumatized. And, I think that trip really ignited for me in some way. And it's interesting because I'm just now in this moment connecting the dots with what I'm going to say. I think it triggered for me the fact that I had been bullied when I was younger. And it drove me, pulled me, compelled me to get into this field. So I went through and completed my undergrad in pre-med, and was going to get in, wanted to get into medical school. Was not doing well at all in the sciences, and I kind of bobbed and weaved and began moving towards psychology. So I got my doctorate in clinical psychology. And this whole time, and that whole time, I kept this burning flame of wanting to help people who've been impacted by trauma. It was there. It never stopped. And this question of, what our intentions are, what our motives are, what your motives are as you do this work has really been at the forefront of really everything I'm about, and the Trauma Therapist Project is about, and the podcast is about, and increasingly more and more my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0, is about. And now really it's what this workshop I'm doing September 20th through the 23rd is about, up in Boone, North Carolina. It's called the Heart-Centered Therapist. And, this idea of intention and wanting to help and needing to help. When I got out of school, I got a job. One of the jobs I got was, and I've talked about this before too, was at a clinic here in Northern California. And I ended up working there for 5 years under a licensed therapist. We were assessing and treating kids who were showing early signs of psychosis. And not surprisingly, many of those kids had suffered trauma. A little while after I started there, maybe a year or two, I started the podcast. And the goal was to, interview, what I imagine to be, master trauma therapists, seasoned trauma therapists. And what happened was, at least one of the themes that popped out to me, I'm sure other people listening would say, well, there were other themes too, but the one that popped out to me was, this focus on intention of the therapist, of the clinician. And in turn, alongside gaining knowledge and education and understanding the neurobiology of trauma and how it impacts the brain and the body, alongside that is the inner work, the crucial, vital inner work of you, the therapist working with the client, understanding why you're in that room, understanding your motives, your reasons. I remember one guest said, I think this was in response to one of the questions I had asked was, can you talk about a early clinical error and or mistake and what you learned from that? And she said that she had come, and I forget who this was, but and I'll never forget this, but she said, initially I came with this idea that I was going to help, that I needed to help. And I think a lot of people who get into this field want to do that naturally. But she said, really, who are you to say that you are going to help that person, the client? Where does that need to help come from? Because oftentimes that word help is charged. It has many facets to it. And understanding that, bringing an awareness to that is I think, so important for each of you who are doing this work. And this idea, this examination or exploration of why you are in this room and what brought you to this field, what inspires you to do this work, is what this workshop is about. And I love it because it invites you, in the classic description of what a therapist is, it invites you to hold that mirror up to yourself in a way I think a lot of people don't, because with trauma, oftentimes there is an immediacy, right? Someone's been traumatized. Someone is traumatized. It's as if the quote unquote issue is known. The problem, if you will, is known. And therefore things need to be attended to, right? They need to be solved or worked on. But as you've heard on this podcast, things need to be allowed to be unfolded, and trust needs to be developed and peeled back and opened up, both in the relationship of the client and the therapist, and with the therapist themselves. That self-trust, and why is that challenging sometimes? Why is it challenging for you to sit and inquire of yourself why you're doing this work? What is getting you up in the morning to do this work? Is it to heal? And is it to help? Is it to fix? Is it to cure? Is it to take away the pain? This idea of exploring this is, in my estimation, something that is not done enough and needs to be done. And it's fascinating because it asks all of us to look at who we are and to bring out the microscope, in a sense, the magnifying glass, and to understand the genesis, to understand our footprints that have gotten us here, and to own that. And how does that then impact the work you do? Let me just take a quick sip of coffee here. I was interviewed on a podcast yesterday. It's called the Inner Stories podcast, with this guy from Belgium. His first name is Jellis. Awesome guy. Really inspiring podcast. You should check it out. And his closing question to me was, and I didn't know this, so I was surprised. And I hadn't planned a response, is what I'm trying to say here. His closing question was, Guy, I like to ask all of my guests, what is your truth? Or what is truth to you? And I was like, oh, geez, intense final question not to have prepared. And what I thought of immediately was, we had been talking about trauma in the interview. And it might have been because of that, but what I thought of immediately was, when I was younger, and I shared this before, I was bullied, and it jacked me up. It really shifted the trajectory of certain elements in my life, namely, relationships and self-confidence and self-esteem and all that stuff. And I said to him, my truth has been learning to understand the power of trusting who I am, not trying to change it or fix it, but to open it up, to allow it to come forth, to honor it. And it's been a journey for me. And rolled into that effort and rolled into that challenge has been willingness and understanding my intention and understanding my influence and understanding what's motivating me and the questions of why am I doing this and where do I want to go? What do I want to do? What do I stand for? What is my strength? What inspires me? And really my journey up to this point has been a continual inquiry into that. And I find myself now in the center of, that journey is, in a sense, which is defined by, on the one hand, this passion to, work with people who've been impacted by trauma, to inspire and help educate clinicians just starting out on their trauma-informed journey, and to do so really with almost a major part, I want to say, one foot in the in the field or the topic of encouraging and inspiring and working with neuroclinicians to explore their own stories and to explore their own questions about why they're doing this work. So within that, is the description of this workshop that I'm doing in September. If you're a new trauma therapist, if you love to explore and honor your strengths and inspirations and influences and your own story and look at the questions or the question of why you're doing this work, within the context of working with people who've been impacted by trauma, with other people who are equally as passionate about this work as you are, I want to invite you to join me in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, in Boone, North Carolina, September 20th through the 23rd. You can check it out by going to the Art of Living Retreat Center and typing in there, Heart Centered Therapist, looking it up, that date, September 20th through 23rd. And I'd love to have you there. Again, I want to thank everyone for listening to this podcast, for supporting this podcast. If you haven't, head over to iTunes, leave me a review. It really helps get the word out, an honest review and a rating. And I'll see you next time. All right, take care. All right, guys, this episode is sponsored by Trauma Therapist 2.0, community to educate, support, to inspire new trauma healers. If you're a new trauma worker, new trauma provider and healer, you're starting out on this trauma-informed journey and you're tired of doing this alone and looking for support, looking to be around a community of other passionate trauma clinicians, I invite you to check out Trauma Therapist 2.0 at traumatherapist2.com. That's traumatherapist2.com. What's the point of having a beautiful website if it doesn't attract the clients you want to see? As the worldwide leaders of website design for therapists, Brighter Vision sees this issue happening way too often. A nice looking website doesn't equate to a successful website. The truth is, your current website might even be turning off potential clients. That's where Brighter Vision comes in. Brighter Vision's team of website designers will create you a website that is centered around attracting and retaining your ideal client so that you can have a nice looking website as well as a successful one. Better yet, Brighter Vision is offering $100 off a new website as part of their 4th of July sale. To take advantage of this offer, simply go to brightervision.com/guy. Again, that's brightervision.com/guy.